In the name of God, most merciful, ever merciful, and may God's peace and blessings be upon His holy Prophet Muhammad and the purified members of his household and progeny. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad wa ajil farajah. Brothers, sisters, and viewers, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Most of us, when we grow up, we acquire a rudimentary understanding of our religion if we are born into this religion. Things that we hear, things that we are brought up with from our parents, from our community. And this is normal until we hit a certain age and a certain level of maturity, at which point we usually start to question certain things because of some of the information that we get. And this is very normal. And questioning and even doubting some of the things that we have heard, especially when we start seeing some contradictions, is absolutely normal. In fact, it's a good thing. It remains a good thing so long as it keeps us moving in the right direction and asking the right questions and learning with the intention of, at the end of the day, ultimately what we want is divine guidance. What we want is to reach the truth for our salvation, to live happily in this life and the next. One of the questions that we have recently encountered over the past little while, I think is a very interesting question, and it may be relevant because maybe a lot of us are wondering about this. The question has to do with the topic of naming. And we're going to explain it in a second. This topic has something to do with an objection that we may hear against, generally speaking, some of the tenets, some of the principles that we consider to be as part of our worldview and as part of our ideology as followers of Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam. The claim goes as follows. When we come to study the lives of Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam, we encounter certain names of the sons of Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam that seem to indicate that the relationship between Ahlul Bayt and certain personalities in history was a very good relationship. In fact, it could even be said that perhaps Ahlul Bayt admired those people, loved those people, and that's the reason why they may have called some of their sons by those names. And this, in fact, this topic of naming should even be studied beyond that. It should be studied as the topic of naming in Islam in general, and looking at the topic in itself in theory, as well as looking at specific personalities in history. It should really be done in this way, because each of these deserves its own discussion, and we don't have time to do that in detail today. But even if we look at the history of the Holy Prophet, we encounter a little bit of the same issue, given that we believe that the ancestors of the Holy Prophet were all from the lineage of Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam, and then we may run into certain names that make us doubt, you know, what do we do about someone like Abd Shams or something like that? So putting that aside for now, inshallah, one day we'll have time to delve a little bit more deeply into that. Let's focus on Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam and the names of some of their sons. Does it mean that if we find the name of someone like Abu Bakr or Umar or Uthman as the sons of Imam Ali alayhi salam, is the only interpretation to this that Imam Ali alayhi salam had a very good relationship with the people who today we consider to be the main carriers of those names? Does it mean that the relationship was in fact one of, say, admiration? Or perhaps that Imam Ali alayhi salam wanted to find a way to keep those names going because he feels that they are representative of, you know, the teachings of Islam and whatever we may associate with those names. Is that the only interpretation? And we start with Imam Ali alayhi salam because the majority of the issue has to do with him and his imamah, and then whatever we establish for him is going to be derived for the rest of the imams. But the same discussion is going to be found for the rest of the imams. The same discussion can be had about the sons of Imam al-Hasan alayhi salam, Imam Hussein, Imam al-Sajjad, Imam al-Baqir, because we find the same names as part of some of their sons. So this is the issue that we want to study. We want to explore this from different angles to see what's the possibility, what's the best way to understand this phenomenon. The answers that we're going to give, some of these answers could be considered complete in themselves, but my recommendation is to take all of these answers together as cumulatively, one on top of the other. They build on each other. That's when you get a much fuller response to this objection or this claim about the names of the sons of some of the Imams alayhi salam. The first answer, or the first point that we need to mention, has to do with the notion of imamah. We need to start from the beginning. We need to start with the main issue around which all of this revolves. The reason why this is even brought up as an issue in the first place is because it has to do with the notion of imamah. The followers of Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam have a certain notion of who an imam is, and those who do not follow the school of Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam have a different understanding of who an imam is. Generally speaking, those who do not follow Ahlul Bayt consider the imam as simply someone who occupies the role of a political ruler. And so there are details around that. There's a lot of different theories. It falls somewhere on the spectrum that you accept anyone in that position, or you accept them if they meet certain conditions. But generally speaking, it's based on the idea that the person who is ruling, the person who is leading in the political sense, that's the person who you also refer to as the imam. This is a completely different notion of who an imam is as the one we find in the school of Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam. And this notion is entirely based on the idea that an imam is someone who is divinely appointed. So, if this notion is understood properly, regardless of whether that person is now going to name their sons one thing or another, it can never make any difference on the idea that this person is a divinely appointed imam or not. We need to start from this as a starting point. So regardless of what we say next, this notion needs to be well understood. Regardless of what the names of the sons of the person may or may not be and what interpretations we may give, at the end of the day, we either agree or not that an imam is someone who is divinely appointed. That's the first and foremost answer that we need for this objection. The second answer that we give to this, and building on the same line of thinking, is that regardless of whatever the names of the sons of the imams may be, they can never change the facts of history. The facts of history will always remain the facts of history, and we need to study history on its own to understand the events that actually happened. Even if we put aside the theological, the religious aspect of those historical events, just looking at the history itself, we need to come to terms with the fact that did the event actually occur or not? Did an event like the events of Ghadir Khum, did they occur or not? Did the events around the Saqifa, did it occur or not? Did the attack on the house of Imam Ali alayhi salam and Fatima al-Zahra, did it occur or not? Was she injured and ultimately died of her injuries because of that attack or not? Was Imam Ali alayhi salam forced or not to pay his allegiance? Under threat? Did those events actually happen or not? And this is a completely historic discussion or exploration or study that we need to sort out and have a position about and reach our conclusions about, so that once this is well established, so we've established the notion of imam, we've established what actually transpired in the events of history. Once this is in place, then I can come to see whether the imams called their sons one thing or another. Because once this is established, regardless of what they called their sons, I still have my truths in terms of theology and belief, and I have my truths in terms of history, regardless of what the Imams call themselves. Okay, so these 2 points really need to be well understood. Now we come to trying to understand a little bit more the culture of the Arabs living at that time. The people who lived in those times, we are told, if you go back and you study the history of the Arabs, we're told that, generally speaking, it was not the father who would name the child, it was the mother. The trend of the Arabs of that time was that usually it was the mother who named the child, 1. And 2, when the father named the child, usually they named them by another name. So the son usually carried either one name given to them by their mother, or they carried 2 names, one of them given by the father and one of them given by the mother. And this was well known. There's no dispute about this. The Arabs who lived at that time knew very well this is customary, this is their culture, this is how they were brought up, this is how their family life functioned. This applied even within Islam and before Islam. We have, for instance, if you go back in history, the tribe of Quraysh. The tribe of Quraysh is named after a man whose name is Quraysh. And so all of his descendants are part of the tribe that ultimately all goes back in their lineage to him. So his name is Quraysh, Quraysh ibn Malik. If you go back in history, you see that the name Quraysh was given to him by his mother. And his father had called him Al-Fuhr. Al-Fuhr ibn Malik is the name that he carried from his father, but the name that he became known for, people associated more with, is the name that his mother gave him, which was Quraysh. And today no one knows Al-Fuhr ibn Malik, but everybody knows Quraysh. This is one example. Another example, for instance, we talked a little bit about Bani Marwan and the role of Al-Hajjaj that they had appointed as a governor. We said that there was an uprising in the city of Medina. After the events of Karbala, there was an uprising, the people revolted against Bani Umayyah. One of the people that led those revolts, his name was Sa'id ibn Jubayr. He was captured by the guards of Al-Hajjaj ibn Yusuf al-Thaqafi. He was brought in front of him. He starts, and this is a fascinating, we don't have time, one day maybe we can go through the details of that whole discussion, the back and forth between them. Sa'id ibn Jubayr was not just a normal man. He's extremely eloquent and very smart. And every answer he gave to Hajjaj in that discussion, he insulted him more. In any case, the first question that he asked him was, "What is your name?" And he told him, "My name is Sa'id ibn Jubayr." And Hajjaj knows that this is one of the men leading the uprising against him. So he tells him, "No, your name is Shaqi ibn Qusayr." So he flips the name to its antonym, to its opposite. Sa'id basically means someone who is fortunate or who is happy. And Jubayr means, Jabr is when something is broken and you mend it, or something that is very strong. So it's almost like his name is, fortunate son of strong, to explain literally and simplistically. And he tells him, "No, your name is Shaqi, you're vile, you're evil, you're misfortunate, ibn Qusayr, son of the broken." So he flips the name to its opposite, to its antonym. At that point, he tells him there's 2 versions to the story. In one version, he tells him, "My mother knew how to name me better than you." That's one version. And another version, he tells him, "Then I shall kill you." And he tells him, "Then my mother was right in naming me Sa'id ibn Jubayr. If I'm actually going to be killed by you, then I am truly fortunate." So in both versions, the answer of Sa'id is that it was his mother who named him. We're trying to establish a cultural trend, just to give a couple of examples. If you go back to the Battle of Khaybar, we're told that the main warrior who came to fight against the Muslims, his name was Marhab. When he came out, he read verses of poetry. When he began, before entering into the fight, which was customary, the big commanders and the big warriors always did this. They incite and they attract attention to themselves. And so he says, I am the one whose mother called him Marhab, carrier of weapons. I am an experienced warrior. You see my flames in the day of the war. Those are a quick translation of the verses of poetry that he recited. Imam Ali alayhi salam came in front of him right away. And he recited verses of poetry. He said, I am the one whose mother called him Haydara. Like the lions of the forests, fearsome when you see him. Both of them referred to the name that their mother gave them. Imam Ali alayhi salam, if we call him Haydar or Haydara, it's because his mother called him Haydar, as he himself says. She did not call him Ali. The name Ali came from somewhere else, from his father and the Holy Prophet ﷺ. So we have multiple examples. These are some of the examples to show that in the Arab culture of the time, it was mainly the woman. By default, it was your mother who would name you. So to say that, let's say an imam called his son something, I need a piece of evidence that tells me that. Otherwise, by default, I would say the imam is part of the Arab culture, and in the Arab culture, it was the mothers naming them. So I need a piece of evidence telling me that it was actually the father in this case who named the son and not the mother. Okay, that's what we're trying to say with this answer. The next point, the next answer, I think we're at 4 right now, is that the reasons why someone may name their son one thing or another is unknown to us. Unless someone tells me why they named their son by a certain name, I don't know why it was done. One example could be that I named them because I admire the carrier of that name, because I want to be inspired. We may decide here, one of you guys may decide here that I'm so inspired and I love Imam Hussein alayhi salam so much that if God grants me a son, I will absolutely call him Hussein or Qasim or Ali. Based on what you hear, based on what you know of the character of those people. Absolutely. A lot of people may name their sons or their daughters or anyone else based on the fact that they have a certain relationship of admiration, respect, inspiration towards that person. But that's not the only reason. I'm sure that a lot of people that you encounter in your lives, if you ask them right now why they were called a certain name, especially in other cultures, or why they decide to call their children a certain name, they will simply say that they like that name. They like how it sounds. Maybe they like its meaning. Not always because of someone who carries that name will they call their son after that name. We have, for instance, we're told that there are some Arabs who traveled to other areas where they encountered some other tribes of Arabs, and they were hearing them call their sons. And every time they called one of their sons, they realized that those are very harsh names. So they asked them, they told them, do you call all of your people in this tribe with these very harsh names? They said, no. We give very tender and gentle and beautiful names to our slaves. And we give very harsh names to our sons. Because we're the only ones who will say the names of our slaves when we call them. So we want those names to be very nice sounding. They're for our own pleasure. As for our sons, because we're always at war, we want the other tribes, when they mention our names and the names of our sons, to fear us and to fear them from their names. Just based on their names, they will not even think about fighting us. So they're using the names more for a psychological effect. And we know that different sounds have a different effect when people hear them. Well, if that is the case, then this may be another reason why you may decide to call someone by a certain name and not another. So it's not always a matter of who's the person that I feel in my worldview to be the most popular carrier of that name, and that must be the only reason why someone would call their son by that name. Okay? The next answer that we can give to this is that if we were to transpose, we would take those names of that day and that culture and we would want to transpose them to today's world, those names would basically be the equivalent of the Mike and the John. These are some of the most common names that you find in that time. Today, because of the hindsight that we have, and because of what we know from history, we may say that in our minds, when we hear one name, we directly associate it with a specific individual who carried that name. But at that time, this is not how people viewed it as they were experiencing and living the events. If you go back in some of the books of history that really give you the details of the lives of the companions of the Holy Prophet specifically, one of the books by العسقلاني الإصابة في تمييز الصحابة, he gives you the names of the people and then their biographies of the people who lived at the time of the Holy Prophet. A quick cursory review of that book, and you find that he says around the Holy Prophet, he's not naming everybody, he's naming the ones that he can provide a biography for. He names 23 people around the Holy Prophet whose name is Umar. And he names 27 people around the Holy Prophet whose name is Uthman. And those are only the ones that are named and listed in that book. Now, he's not saying this is in all of the Arab land and Arab culture at the time of the Holy Prophet, these are all the Umars and Uthmans. So this is simply to establish that at that time, these were extremely common names. So before we jump to a conclusion and say that because someone is named a certain name after a specific individual, if I understand this context, it starts to change my view of maybe why certain names were used and not other names. These were the common traditional names used at that time by the Arabs. Now, if we drill down a little bit further into the specific names. So the names really that we're talking about, and we'll talk about other ones, but there are a few names that I think are the ones that are the most cited regarding this objection or this claim. The one that is the most used perhaps is, for instance, Abu Bakr. So the name of Abu Bakr, sometimes it is used by the Arabs as a first name, and sometimes it becomes a nickname, let's say, or because of the person that is born to you. So it's not really your authentic name, the name that your parents gave you when you were born. It becomes a name that you take for yourself or you become known for afterwards. If you go back to the man who would become the first Khalifa, Abu Bakr, what is his real name? It's unanimous that his name was not Abu Bakr. His name was either Atiq or Abdullah ibn Uthman. So if you go back in the books of history, there is a consensus that this was not his name. So are we saying that it's because we've associated certain names with his nickname? Why don't we associate it with his first name, his real name? What would happen then? So if his name is Abdullah, then there are very many of them as well. And if we say that his name is Atiq, then it's a very specific name, and most likely it was a nickname given to him for an entire story that I don't have time to go into right now. That's one. If we look at a few other names, for instance, the name of Uthman. Today we may associate that name with the man who came to be the third Khalifa, Uthman ibn Affan. In fact, Imam Ali alayhi salam, in his time, was asked about the reason why he called one of his sons Uthman. And the Imam was very direct in his answer. He said it is after my brother Uthman ibn Mad'un. And to me, this is a very important declaration from the Imam. He did not need to say this. So if he did, it means he's making a point to state that, contrarily to what you may think at that time and today, if I chose this name of Uthman, it is not because of Uthman ibn Affan. It is because of Uthman ibn Mad'un. Uthman ibn Mad'un is one of the great companions of the Holy Prophet. Inshallah, one day we have the opportunity to talk about him. The Holy Prophet cried profusely when he died. He kissed him and he took care of his burial rites himself. So Imam Ali alayhi salam says, to keep the remembrance of my great brother and companion Uthman ibn Mad'un, I called my son Uthman. Okay, so this changes everything. So when we're building on this logic and we see that there are many people who are called by these names, including a lot of the companions of the Holy Prophet, then maybe those names are not being used to associate with those specific individuals that we may think about today. In the same line of thinking, a couple of days ago we mentioned, for instance, Salama. And we said that she sent a letter to Imam Ali alayhi salam during the Battle of the Camel, telling him that, here is my son, if you may accept him. And of course the Imam accepted him. He grew up in the household of the Holy Prophet. He was a great companion of the Holy Prophet and a great companion of Imam Ali alayhi salam. And the Imam used him as a governor later over Bahrain and over Persia. So why would we not say that this man, whose name was Umar ibn Salama or ibn Abi Salama, why would he not be the one that Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam may be referring to when they call their sons Umar, for instance? Now we go to perhaps the most damaging or the most used with strength arguments from a passage that we find in one of the books of Ibn Taymiyyah, the book that he actually wrote as a refutation of the beliefs of the Shia. It's called Minhaj al-Sunnah al-Nabawiyya fi al-Rad ala kalam al-Shi'ati wal-Qadriyya. That's the book. And it was intended specifically as a rebuttal of the beliefs and of the Shia. And in there is a passage that I'm not going to read to you right now. I'm just going to give you maybe the three big points that he makes there. There's a passage in which he talks specifically about the naming issue. So the main points that he makes are that, first of all, he says that the Shia, the followers of Ahlul Bayt, they never call anyone by the names of Abu Bakr or Umar or Uthman. That's the first claim. And that claim is absolutely false. Anyone who goes through the history of the Shia will see the names of the companions of the Imams and the sons of the Imams carrying those names. So that's already a very big issue. The second claim that he makes is that he says the Shia refuse to deal with or interact with anyone who carries those names, which again is even more absurd than the first claim. Okay, and we're going to go into some details. And the third claim that he makes is that he starts listing the names of the companions of the Holy Prophet at the time of the Holy Prophet, and he says, see how those people carry the same names as some of the people who were the mushrikeen and known munafiqeen. And at the time of the Holy Prophet did not ask those people to change their names because there are evil, bad people who carry those names. Nor did the Muslims or the companions ever decide not to call their sons by those names or not to interact with those people. And therefore, the bottom line is, if we look at the conduct of the Holy Prophet and the companions, that you call someone by a certain name absolutely means nothing. So his claim is, so why are the Shia doing this type of discrimination against people and against names? The names in themselves don't mean anything. So as we said, the first point, that the Shia have never used those names, very quickly, that's just an absurdity and it's too easy to disprove. And the reason why we're talking about this today is because, as we said, not only the Shia but their Imams called their sons by those names. We have names of many of the sons of the Imams by those names and other ones, and we shall list some of them. So that one is too easy to answer, we put it aside. The second issue is, he says that they refuse to deal with anyone who carries those names. One of the people that I thought I would mention very quickly, Yazid ibn Sarid. Yazid ibn Sarid was considered one of the close companions of Imam al-Kadhim alayhi salam. He's considered trustworthy, extremely knowledgeable, and in fact he is a descendant of Zayd al-Shahid, the son of Imam al-Sajjad alayhi salam. Okay, so you would say, you know, this is as Shia as they come, in lineage, in culture, in ideology, as Shia as they come. And his name happens to be not only, and we're going to come back to this point, for instance, Abu Bakr or Umar or Uthman, his name is Yazid. And no one ever said, we're not going to deal with you or interact with you, and you're a bad person because you carry this name. The Shia have never said that someone is good or bad based on their name. The name is a very secondary element. It has to do with your merit and your conduct and your beliefs and your morals. And then the last point that he made, which is when he says that if we look at the life of the Holy Prophet and the companions, we see that they never dealt with the names as anything more than just names. A name is just that, a name. Don't look more into it. And that's why the Holy Prophet dealt with people who carried all sorts of names, including his own companions and their sons, who gave names of people who were well known to be mushrikeen and munafiqeen at that time. Excellent point. We completely agree with you. So if that is the case, then why is it that when we come to the sons of Ahlul Bayt, suddenly the name carries more than just being a name? If the name is simply just a name and we don't need to look more into it, then you cannot flip the argument and say, but in this case, if Imam Ali called his son Abu Bakr or Umar or Uthman, then in that case, it is because it means something. It either means something or it doesn't. You cannot do both. So these are the kind of the main arguments if you are, dealing with someone going back to the Kalam version of the argument. This is what you would find, and these are the answers to it. Let's go further than that. We just mentioned the name of Yazid ibn Sarid. Let's say, for argument's sake, that there's ambiguity. The reason why we're talking about people like the names of Abu Bakr or Umar or Uthman is because if we go back to the carriers of those names, there is one side that says the relationship between them and Ahlul Bayt was actually very good. And it was only later that it was distorted. History was distorted. And so there's a room for us to work through, and this argument may work. So you may say Ahlul Bayt may call their sons a certain name because they like the person, and then we have to go through these arguments. Okay, so let's put this aside for a second and look at names of people about whom there is no ambiguity. There is no doubt. Let's say there is doubt. Let's agree that there is doubt about the relationship between Ahlul Bayt and people like Abu Bakr or Umar or Uthman, the real carriers of those names. Let's look at a name of someone like Abdurrahman ibn Muljam. Let's look at the name of someone like Ubaidullah ibn Ziyad. Let's look at the name of someone like Harun, who's referred to as Harun al-Rashid. So, if there is ambiguity about the relationship between Ahlul Bayt and people like Abu Bakr, Umar, or Uthman, there is certainly no ambiguity about the relationship between Ahlul Bayt and people like Yazid, or like Abdurrahman ibn Muljam, or like Ubaidullah ibn Ziyad, because in those cases, no one can come and claim that the relationship was good. They were the direct killers of Ahlul Bayt. And we see that, for instance, in the case of Abdurrahman, we have a number of Imams who called their sons Abdurrahman. And in the case of Ubaidullah, we have a number of the Imams who called their sons Ubaidullah. Even Imam al-Kadhim alayhi salam called one of his sons Harun. Okay, so this confirms that the naming of someone can definitely not be used as an argument to say that you like or you don't like one of the carriers of that name. Okay, so this is just to seal the deal on that. In addition to this, I think we can add to all of this the fact that if you go back in history, and there's entire treaties or books written on this notion of tasheef. Tasheef is when there's a distortion in the writing. So something is written in a certain way and then it ends up being written in another way. Sometimes it's because it's a mistake in the typography, in the way you're writing. Whoever happens to be writing that book, copying that book, they make a mistake in the writing. That's one way to end up with tasheef. So the experts of the manuscripts have to see if there's tasheef, they have to correct it. But another form of tasheef is the intentional tasheef, where you actually intentionally change a name to another name. And one of the names about which there are, as I said, treaties written, well-known case of distortion of names in Arabic history and Islamic history, is the name Amr with the name Umar. They may sound, and someone who doesn't know enough of Arabic spelling, they may think that Umar and Amr are written the same way. It's Ayn Mim Ra. No. Amr is written Ayn Mim Ra Waw. There's one more letter at the end of the name Amr in Arabic that's not pronounced. You don't pronounce the waw. If there is no waw, even without putting the vowels, without putting the harakat, if there is no waw, then you know the name is Umar. If you put a waw, the name is Amr. You don't need the harakat for that. And there are manuscripts where you can clearly show that many of the sons of Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salam were actually called Amr and not Umar. If you can go back to the manuscripts. But when you see later versions of those books, the name Amr became Umar. So that changes everything, because now we're talking about a completely different name. So that one, keep it in mind. And then one important point has to do with the actual war that was going on against certain names. I don't think it should come as a surprise to anyone who knows history that right from the beginning of the movement of Tashayyu', there are certain names that became subject to a war. Clearly people who were called Ali, or who were called Hassan, or Hussein, or Fatima, or Hamza, or Ja'far, they attracted attention. Right from the beginning of the movement and the appearance of a group of people that can be identified as Shia. Anyone who studies history knows this. It's too well documented. And this remained the case for centuries. And anyone who knows the news and what was going on, say in Iraq recently with Daesh, who would kill people based on their names. If they carried those names, then they would be known as Shia. And if you go into our riwayat, our narrations, we are told that this is also going to remain the case in the future. The Sufyani who will appear right before the reappearance of Imam al-Hujjah Ajallahu Faraja, we are told in the narrations that he will kill anyone that he can get a hand of or a hold of who is named Ali or Fatima. So this is a phenomenon that's been known in history and that will continue into the future. This is not a new thing. If anyone has a sensitivity or an allergy or a problem with names, it was not the Shia. It was their enemies who tried to exterminate those names. And this may have created a reaction. So, if you go back to the early days of Islam, this already became a trend. The mushrikeen of Mecca already started having a problem with certain names because they were associated with Islam, especially after the Prophet moved to the city of Medina. And then there were people like Al-Hamza and Ali and others who were becoming the very known, well-known warriors at that time. And they became the public enemy of the people of Quraysh, who will never accept to call their sons by those names. This is where it initially began. And if you fast forward in history and you go back, and this is well documented, that the sympathizers who were with Aisha in the Battle of the Camel, and the group who eventually went with Muawiyah, continued this war against specific names. When Muawiyah became a Khalifa, he made it a law that anyone who gives a public sermon, anyone who takes to a pulpit This was going on everywhere in the Islamic world, at least once a week, in the Friday prayers and more. That they had to begin and end their sermon with the cursing, with la'an of Imam Ali alayhi salam. For 70 years this went on. In addition to this, he made it a law that no one who is called Ali is to benefit from anything from the country. So if you're called Ali, you're going to be persecuted. You don't get funding from the country like anybody else. And at that time, if you go back in history, you will see that those who were called Ali fell in two categories. There are people who insisted on being known and called Ali, and they were persecuted for it. And there are people who were called Ali who changed their name. And this is again well documented in history. They changed their name to Ulay. Ulay is a diminutive. It's a smaller form of Ali. So when they were asked, is your name Ali? They would say, no, my name is Ulay. And you see when that appeared in history, when did that phenomenon happen? It happened at that time because there was a war against that name. And this is when, if you continue at the time of right after these events, and we started talking about Bani Marwan and Al-Hajjaj, after the events of Karbala, they would find and kill the people. At that time there was no killing, there was persecution. By the time we reached the time of Al-Hajjaj and Al-Marwan, they were capturing and killing people who were called by Shia names, without even asking questions on what have you done and what is your crime. So to say that there's a sensitivity on the part of the Shia against those names, yes, there might be a lot less use of those names after the time of Imam al-Sajjad alayhi salam. Because now it's becoming an open confrontation and the names are being weaponized. There's an ideological war going on. And this is why you see that at the time of Imam Hussein alayhi salam, there's a story where Marwan, he asks one of the sons of Imam Ali alayhi salam, what is your name? And he tells him Ali. He tells him, does he not have another son called Ali? He tells him, yes. And he names the names of Imam Hussein alayhi salam by the name of Ali. And he says how strange and funny that it's as though he has run out of names. So he came back and told Imam Hussein alayhi salam about this. And Imam Hussein alayhi salam said, may God curse him. I pray to God that he would grant me 100 boys just so that I could call all of them Ali. And this is because the Imam is countering an ideological war in the same manner. If the names are going to be what is problematic, then I'm going to continue the name, to use that name in that manner. We're almost out of time here, so let me just very quickly. This entire thing is based on kind of a fantasy or a charade, I don't know what to call it, a fiction that, everything was going really well between the Sahaba, and so that's the reason why they would call each other by each other's names. So I think we've completely shattered that idea. But maybe to add to it, we have a narration, if you want to go back to one of the most authentic books in the Sunni school where this claim is made, from people who tried to establish one way or another these good relationships between the Sahaba. We're told that at some point there was a disagreement between the uncle of the Prophet, Al-Abbas, and Imam Ali alayhi salam after the passing away of the Holy Prophet in the time of the Khilafah of Umar ibn al-Khattab. So they went to him to get his judgment. And he got angry at that time. I'm not going to go into the details. He says something to them that, now you're coming for judgment to me, but yesterday, when the one before me, referring to Abu Bakr, he said that the prophets don't leave anything as an inheritance, and he became the Khalifa, you called him Kadiban, Athiman, Ghadiran, Kha'inan. You considered him a liar, a sinner, a backstabber, and a cheater. And now, you consider me the same thing, and he repeats the same words. So this is just as one example, to say if the Khalifa is talking at that time with someone in this manner, would you say they have a good relationship? We can just go and say they love each other so much that he's going to go back and call his sons by the name of that person? Is that logical? Does that make sense? It doesn't make sense. Now let's fast forward very quickly to a man by the name of Umar al-Atraf. Umar al-Atraf was a man born to a woman by the name of As-Sahba al-Taghlubiyya Habib. Imam Ali alayhi salam married that woman when he went to Basra, and she gave birth to this man. She gave birth to twins, to this man and a girl. The girl was Ruqayyah, the daughter of Imam Ali alayhi salam, that he would marry to Muslim ibn Aqil later. Her twin brother is Umar al-Atraf. He's referred to as Al-Atraf as in one-sided, because they say his honor comes from one side, which is Imam Ali, not two sides. Like there is another Umar under Imam Sajjad alayhi salam, his son, he's referred to as Umar al-Ashraf, because of two, he is a Hashimi on both his mother's and his father's side. In any case, we're told in history that when this man was initially born, Imam Ali alayhi salam was close to Umar. Umar asked a favor from Imam Ali. This is the descendant of Umar al-Atraf talking in history, if the report is valid. He says that Umar ibn al-Khattab, when he was Khalifa, and there's another report that it was Uthman, when he was born, Umar al-Atraf, he asked Imam Ali alayhi salam to grant him as a favor to allow him to name the boy. And Imam Ali alayhi salam accepted, and he named him Umar. And so he gave him a gift. The story goes that he gave him a gift, a slave by the name of Muwarriq or Muwarriq. Okay, so we put that aside. Now let's fast forward who this man was. If we go to the events that happened later, if we go to the time when Imam Hussein alayhi salam is in al-Madinah al-Munawwara, this is the son of Umar al-Atraf talking. He says, I heard my father talking to Bani Aqil. Aqil being the brother of Imam Ali alayhi salam, so he's talking to his relatives. He says, my father told them, when we were in Medina, and I heard that Imam Hussein alayhi salam had refused to give his allegiance to Yazid ibn Muawiyah. When this happened, he says, I went to Imam Hussein alayhi salam, and I waited until the Imam was all alone. And I entered to see the Imam. And I told him, O Aba Abdullah, I want to tell you something. I heard your brother report from his father. So he's saying Imam al-Hasan alayhi salam, report from Imam Ali alayhi salam. It's a very strange way to talk to Imam Hussein alayhi salam. I heard from your brother who reports from his father. And then he says, he's telling Bani Aqil, I choked over my tears. I couldn't finish. So Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam tells him, what did he say? Did he say that I would get killed? So initially he said no because he didn't want to say that, and then he said yes, I heard that you would get killed. So he tells him, he continues, Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, first Umar al-Atraf tells him, and because of that, I think that it would be better for you to pay your allegiance to Yazid. This is a very strange thing to say, based on the beginning of the hadith. We'll come back to that. So Imam Hussein alayhi salam continues, and he tells him, my father has told me that the Holy Prophet has told him that he shall be murdered and how, and that I shall be murdered and how. And he has also told me that my grave is going to be close to his grave. And so Imam Hussein alayhi salam continues, he says, Umar, do you think that you know something that I do not know? I will never give away my soul so cheaply. So I'll never pay allegiance to Yazid in this manner that you're asking me to do. And then he adds, when Fatima al-Zahra shall come to see her father, she will complain to him about how his ummah maltreated and persecuted her progeny. And anyone who persecutes the progeny of Fatima shall surely never see or enter paradise. And then Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam invited Umar al-Atraf to join him as he is departing. These are the last moments of Imam al-Hussein in Medina. The Imam is done. The caravan is ready to go, and here is his brother telling him, pay allegiance to Yazid and stay here. So the Imam flips it and turns it around and tells him, why don't you accompany us, since you know what you know? And he refuses, and he stays behind in Medina. Now, if you truly believe in Islam and the Holy Prophet and who Imam Ali alayhi salam, who happens to be your father, and Imam al-Hasan, who happens to be your brother, if you truly believe in that, and you believe that God has said that Imam al-Hussein is going to be killed, what, you're trying to deviate the plan of God? Do you think that by paying allegiance to Yazid, for instance, he will not get killed? Do you not understand how this works? Or do you not even carry a little bit of faith? Is there a problem in your belief system? And here's the Imam calling you to join him. Why would you not join Imam Ali alayhi salam, Imam Hussein alayhi salam, especially if you know what you know? And there's a reason why the Imam mentions Fatima al-Zahra and the people who will persecute her progeny. So basically he's telling him, if you want a guaranteed entry into paradise, come with me. Who would let that go? Especially if you have grown up in that house. But this was the fate of this man. And we are told that after the caravan of the prisoners came back, after they went to Kufa and Sham and they came back to Medina, and he saw them, unbelievable, he went to his home and he dressed in his most colorful mu'asfara, as they say, in his most colorful dress, most colorful clothes, as though he's going to a party. And he established a seating area for him, and he sat there waiting for the people to come and congratulate him because nothing happened to him. He escaped. You know, someone goes through an accident and they escape, so you go and you congratulate them and you wish them well. This is what he's expecting the people to come do. After his entire family and the household of the Holy Prophet has been slaughtered in the manner that they were, this was his reaction. Not to, let's say, at least, the least he could have done is to accept condolences. So he does this, and then, you know, it continues. He says, at that time, he says, أَنَا الْغُلَامُ الْحَازِمُ, I am the one who is wise. Had I joined them, I would have been killed in the battle like them. And then afterwards, he went back and forth, giving his allegiance initially to the people of Bani Umayyah. He gave his allegiance to Al-Hajjaj in the most degrading way. He went to him to give him his allegiance, and Al-Hajjaj was eating, so his hand was full of food. So he told him, I won't give you my hand, I'll give you my foot. If you want to, pay allegiance to my foot. And he paid allegiance to Al-Hajjaj in that manner. And then he went and he paid his allegiance to Bani Zubayr, who were also trying to establish their own khilafah. And he joined them, and he would go back and forth between Bani Zubayr and Al-Umayyin. And he fought against the sons, the descendants of Imam al-Hasan and Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, Imam al-Sajjad in his time. He went to Abdul Malik ibn Marwan, complaining from Imam al-Sajjad alayhi salam, telling him, I am the eldest of Bani Hashim, I should be the one in charge of sadaqat of Imam Ali alayhi salam, all the charities that he had left behind. Why should it be someone like Ali ibn al-Hussein? He's younger, it should be me. And so at that time he told him, right is right, his name is on the will, he's the one who's going to keep that, you two leave. And so when they left, he started insulting Imam al-Sajjad alayhi salam as they were leaving. And the Imam did not respond to him. And later we're told in history, his son Muhammad ibn Umar, he came to Imam al-Sajjad alayhi salam, throwing himself on him and kissing him and telling him, you know, he's asking forgiveness and pardon from Imam al-Sajjad for the behavior of his father. And Imam al-Sajjad alayhi salam told him, don't worry, it's not because of the bad relationship that your father has with us that we're going to take that on you and punish you for that. And in fact, Imam al-Sajjad alayhi salam had a daughter by the name of Khadija, and he offered her in marriage to Muhammad ibn Umar al-Atraf, and he accepted and they got married. Compare the behavior of a man like that, whose ultimate fate was he died far away under Bani Zubayr, a very appropriate death for him. Compare someone like that to another brother of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, such as Al-Abbas. A man who, right from his birth, from the moment that he is born, he does nothing but show loyalty and servitude to Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. And clearly not because he is his brother, but because he is his Imam. Right from the beginning of his life, this is how he conducted himself. When Al-Abbas alayhi salam, he's truly a magnificent personality. We can't just, you know, mention him without mentioning anything of his splendid, magnificent character. When he was born, he probably lived with Imam Ali alayhi salam for a few years, and after which he was about perhaps 14 years old when Imam Ali alayhi salam passes away. The next 10 years of his life, he's with Imam Hassan alayhi salam, who passes away. By the time we reach year 61, he's about 34 years old. And to understand a little bit of the role that he plays, we see how the Imams, when they do his ziyarah, they say about him, they praise his brotherly love to Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. They say, نِعْمَ الْأَخُ الْمُوَاسِي. You were truly a brother who showed support. But it went so much beyond the brotherhood. There are so many indications that show the secret of the magnificence of Al-Abbas, but it requires study and pondering. Because the problem is, when you have someone like Al-Abbas alayhi salam, as magnificent as he is, when he lives at the same time as people like Imam Ali alayhi salam and Imam al-Hassan and Imam al-Hussein, their light shines too bright, so you don't see the other lights. When you live at the same time as someone like Imam al-Hussein, your light becomes overtaken by the light of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. Let's turn it around. We go to Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam to see how he dealt with his brother. What is the status of Al-Abbas? Who is Al-Abbas? We have in one narration, on the 9th of Muharram, as we said, there were battles on the 6th, 7th, and 8th. On the 9th of Muharram, the army of Ibn Sa'd started advancing. Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam told his brother Al-Abbas, he told him, may I be a ransom to you. Why don't you ride to those people and ask them what they want? So he went along with Habib and Zuhair and others to see what they wanted, and he saw that that's it, they're attacking the camp. So he came back and told Imam Hussein alayhi salam, who told him, go back and tell them to leave us alone until the morning. For God knows how much I love to pray and to read His Quran, and I would like to get more of that in this night. And so he went back and asked for that, and there was a back and forth because Umar ibn Sa'd doesn't want to show weakness. But someone else from Bani Umayyah said, if they were anyone else, we would have granted them one day. There's no difference. So they accepted, and they came back and they said, fine, the war will be tomorrow morning on the Ashir. Notice the first words of Imam Hussein to him. He tells him, may I be a sacrifice to you. May I be a ransom to you. Today when we talk, if you hear people mention the name of Imam al-Hujjah Ajallah Farajah, it's often followed by the words, Ruhi wa arwahul alameen lahul fida. May my soul and the souls of the world be a ransom to him. Because we believe that your existence only acquires significance because he exists. Nothing would exist without him. Now, if this person that you think is the key and the reason for existence says about someone else, may I be a ransom to you, then obviously this is an indication of what kind of person he is. Imam al-Sajjad alayhi salam, when he talks about Al-Abbas alayhi salam, he says, may God have mercy upon my uncle Al-Abbas. He was truly someone who fought and who sacrificed until both of his arms were cut off. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will replace those two arms with two wings to fly with among the angels of paradise, as he did with Ja'far ibn Abi Talib, when he replaced his two arms that were cut in the battle with wings. And when he shall be resurrected in the afterlife, he will have a rank that will make all of the shuhada jealous of him. And here there's two meanings. Either we say shuhada as in the sense of the martyrs, those killed in the way of Allah, or we use the term shuhada as the Quran uses it. Those Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses as the witnesses and those who provide testimony in the afterlife. The Holy Quran and the prophets and the messengers, those are the shuhada in the Quran. And so when Imam Sajjad says that this is his rank, then we start seeing glimpses of the greatness of this man. That maybe in this world we don't really get to see his light fully because he lived at the time of Imam Hussein alayhi salam, at the same time of other Imams. We're told that many of our scholars say when an Imam passes away, if you look at the history of the Imams, it can only be an Imam who comes to perform their burial rites. Look at the Holy Prophet, when he passes away, Imam Ali alayhi salam performed his burial rites alone. Imam al-Hassan, his burial rites alone, Imam al-Hussein performed them. Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, in the narration we have, when Imam al-Sajjad came to perform his burial rites, Bani Asad were there, they helped him to gather the body parts and the bodies of the martyrs of Karbala. But when it came to the body of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, he told them, back away, I have someone who is helping me. But if you look, you will only see Imam al-Sajjad alayhi salam working. The same thing as Imam Ali alayhi salam said about the Holy Prophet. He's being helped. He's being helped by the angels. No one else is to touch this body at this point. If you go in the narrations, you see that when Imam al-Sajjad finished burying everyone, he came to the body of Al-Abbas alayhi salam, and he threw himself on the body, and he did the exact same thing as he did with the body of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. He kissed him from the slain throat, and he kissed him elsewhere on his body, on his injuries. And then he started performing the burial rites. He did a ziyarah and then he performed the burial rites. And they wanted to help him, Bani Asad, and he told them, no, I have someone helping me. Again, signs of this greatness of this man. More than that, we are told that if you look at everyone who passes away and dies on the land of Karbala, they are all buried together as the shuhada, except Al-Abbas. Basically, what we can tell from this is that Imam Hussein alayhi salam, every time someone dies, Imam Hussein would go pick them up, bring them to his camp, and he would read verses of the Quran or say certain words to show the honor of these people. He did this with every single martyr in Karbala. Imagine now today an army of today's world, and you have a commander who is killed on a foreign land or away. Would they not do anything they can to get the body of that commander back because of the honor and the symbol that it represents? How come Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam did not bring back the body of Al-Abbas alayhi salam? I don't have a real answer to this, but I think the question is very genuine. I can propose two answers to this. One answer, potentially, is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants to show some of the honor of Al-Abbas in this world. Because so long as he is with Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, he's going to be overshadowed by that light. So by ensuring that he is not going to be buried with the rest of the martyrs and right beside Imam al-Hussein, it means that in the future he's going to have his own grave, which is the case today in Karbala. No one would go to visit Imam Hussein alayhi salam without going to visit specifically Al-Abbas alayhi salam. And perhaps this was the doing of Imam Hussein alayhi salam, to make sure that this is how it would be, to show some of the greatness of that man for later generations, not to bring him back and put him along with the rest of the great martyrs, to keep him alone near the river. And the second interpretation is perhaps this has to do with the personality of Al-Abbas, who supported Imam Hussein alayhi salam throughout his entire life. And my interpretation perhaps is that he wanted to support the Imam even after his death. I think it's difficult to imagine that Al-Abbas did not know what was going to happen. Someone about whom Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam says that he had a penetrating vision, and he had a solid faith. Someone who grew up in the house of Imam Ali alayhi salam with Imam al-Hassan and Imam al-Hussein. Would you not think that he knows a little bit more about what's going on than the external appearances? Would he not know what was going to happen? Would he not know that while Imam Hussein alayhi salam brought back all of the martyrs one by one to the camp, that it was the body of Imam Hussein alayhi salam that would stay alone in the desert for 3 days after his head would be cut off under the sun? And so perhaps he wanted to support Imam Hussein alayhi salam even with this. So he tells him, we know what will happen to you, and I don't want you to be the only one in this state. So you leave me alone under the sun in the same manner as well. You don't bring me back under the tents. And if this is maybe something difficult to imagine, when we are told on the night of the 9th, Shimr ibn al-Jawshan, he stood on the enemy camp and he started yelling and screaming, "Where are the sons of our sister?" The mother, al-Baneen, the mother of al-Abbas and his brothers, is from the same tribe as Shimr. So he refers to her as his sister. And he says, "Where are the sons of my sister?" Al-Abbas and his brothers ignored him. Imam al-Hussein heard the calls again and again. He told him, "Go talk to him. Even though he may be full of debauchery and perversion, go talk to him, see what he wants." He goes and talked to him. He told him, "Leave Imam al-Hussein, and we shall grant you and your brothers immunity. You are, after all, the sons of our sister. So you have security and immunity. We won't do anything to you." And he told him, "May God curse you and your immunity, that you grant us immunity and you leave Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam to fight you." And he came back to Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. On the way, he encounters Zuhair ibn al-Qayn, who came out. No one knows what Shimr and al-Abbas are talking about. But Zuhair ibn al-Qayn read the situation and knew what was going on. He knew that there's a relationship there. He doesn't know how al-Abbas will behave. So he goes out and waits for al-Abbas. And perhaps there's a great injustice against this companion of Imam Hussein alayhi salam, Zuhair ibn al-Qayn. Every time he's mentioned, they say, وَكَانَ عُثْمَانِيُّ الْهَوَى. And he was someone who was inclined towards Uthman. With a narration like this one, I think it's clear that even if he showed tendencies towards Uthman, I think it was out of taqiyyah, out of protecting himself. He waits for al-Abbas to come close enough, and he tells him, "Abbas, I have something to tell you." He tells him, "Go ahead." He tells him, "I have a narration that I want to narrate to you." And he goes back to the time of 34 years before, when Imam Ali alayhi salam asks his brother Aqil, he tells him, "I want you to find me a woman who has been born from the most valiant and brave and courageous warriors the Arabs have ever seen. Because I want her to give me a son who will support my son al-Hussein in his hour of need." And this is when Zuhair tells him, "And you are that man, and you are the one who was supposed to be treasured for this moment." So in other words, he's telling him, "I hope you did not make a deal with Shimr ibn al-Jawshan." So al-Abbas tells him, "Zuhair, do you think that in this time I need you to tell me what to do and how to support al-Hussein, our Imam al-Hussein? I swear to you that I shall show you things that will only make your eyes happy." What happens after that, however, is that al-Abbas never really got a chance to fight. If you go back in the history, you see that when he comes to Imam al-Hussein and asks to fight, the Imam does not tell him, "You're allowed to fight." He tells him, "If you are about to fight, that's it." He came to the Imam after everybody has been killed. No more companions and no more men left in the household. He's the last one left and he's still holding the banner. So when he came to the Imam and he told the Imam, "Allow me to fight, my heart is filled, I can't take this anymore." He tells him, "If you leave, then my army will get scattered and the enemy will see our weakness. But if you must, then at least go ask some water for these children." So al-Abbas alayhi salam goes and asks water and they refuse. He comes back, he grabs the bag of water and he enters into the battle. But he's not entering the battle to fight. He is entering the battle to get water. So he goes towards the river where there are 4,000 soldiers stationed. And he fights until he removes them off of the water and he enters the water. And he picks up with his hand one scoop of water and he throws it because he remembers the thirst of Imam Hussein alayhi salam. And he says, "How can I drink when my brother and Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam is thirsty?" He fills the bag of water and he goes back rushing to the camp. The yellers start yelling in the camp of the enemies that if this water reaches the camp of Imam al-Hussein, where there's only al-Abbas and Imam al-Hussein left, if this water reaches, then they will exterminate you all. Do not let this water reach. And so they surround him from every side. He fights with his only preoccupation trying to get the water back to the camp. They cut off his right hand. He carries the sword with his left hand. And he keeps fighting until his left hand or his left arm is cut off. He protects the water bag with his own chest and body. Then they start, in the narration it says, then the arrows came like rain. And one arrow landed in the bag of water and it poured the water. And another arrow landed in his eye and they hit him on his head and he fell to the ground saying, Assalamu alayka ya Aba Abdullah. When Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam came to Aba al-Fadl al-Abbas and he saw him, he held his back or his side and he said, now my back has been broken and now I have become weak and now my enemy can hope to beat me. Assalamu ala al-Hussein wa ala Ali ibn al-Hussein wa ala awlad al-Hussein wa ala ashab al-Hussein wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi al-tayyibin al-tahirin.